Peter's death had hit her harder than anything else, and Marcus wasn't sure if she would ever forgive herself for it. But it wasn't her fault. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Leah said suddenly, her voice breaking. Peter, he was supposed to be here. He was supposed to help rebuild. Marcus turned to face her, his heart aching at the pain in her voice. Peter believed in you, Leah. He trusted you to carry on his legacy. And that's what you're doing. Leah let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. His legacy? What legacy? We fought, and now he's dead. What kind of legacy is that? Marcus felt a pang of guilt twist in his chest. He had known Peter for a short time, but the man's influence had been undeniable. He had been a symbol of the resistance, a beacon of hope for those who had stood against Nero's regime. And now, that beacon had been snuffed out. But Peter's death hadn't been in vain. Marcus knew that. And deep down, he believed Leah knew it too. Peter didn't die for nothing, Marcus said softly, his voice steady. He died fighting for what he believed in. For the future of this city. For you. Leah's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she turned to look at Marcus, her expression raw with grief. He shouldn't have had to die at all. Marcus didn't have an answer for that. There was no justification for the loss, no words that could ease the pain. All he could do was stand beside her, offering the only comfort he had, his presence. They stood in silence again, the weight of their shared loss settling over them like a shroud. Marcus wanted to reach out to her, to hold her, but he wasn't sure if she would accept it. They had been through so much together, but there was still a distance between them, one that Marcus wasn't sure he could ever bridge. Leah took a deep breath, her voice steadier now, though still laced with pain. Do you think any of this was worth it? Marcus frowned, unsure of how to answer. He had asked himself that question many times since Nero had fallen, whether the sacrifices they had made, the lives they had lost, had been worth the price of victory. I don't know, Marcus admitted, his voice quiet. But I do know that if we hadn't fought, Nero would still be in power. And we couldn't let that happen. Leah's gaze dropped to the ground, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. But what about us? What about the people who had to die for this? Was it worth their lives? Marcus's throat tightened as he looked at her. This was the question that haunted both of them. The price of power had been steep, and while the city was free of Nero's tyranny, the cost had been personal. It had taken Peter's life. It had taken the lives of countless others who had stood up against Nero. I don't know if it was worth it, Marcus said softly. But I do know that you didn't ask for any of this, Leah. You didn't ask to be a part of this fight. You chose to stand up for what was right, and that's something that Peter believed in. That's something I believe in. Leah's jaw clenched, her eyes hardening as she stared at the horizon. But I couldn't save him. Marcus took a step closer, his voice gentle but firm. You couldn't save everyone, Leah. You did everything you could. She turned to him then, her eyes flashing with anger and frustration. But it wasn't enough, was it? Peter is dead, and I'm the one who has to live with that. Marcus's heart ached at the pain in her voice. He had seen Leah at her strongest, leading the resistance, defying Nero's forces, standing tall in the face of danger. But now, in this moment of vulnerability, he saw the toll it had taken on her. The weight of her choices, the lives that had been lost, weighed heavily on her soul. You're not responsible for Peter's death, Marcus said softly, reaching out to place a hand on her shoulder. You didn't kill him. Nero did. Leah flinched at his touch, her shoulders tensing. For a moment, Marcus thought she would pull away, that the walls she had built around herself would slam back into place. But instead, she stood still, her breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. I don't know how to move forward, Leah whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to live with this. Marcus's hand tightened on her shoulder, his heart breaking for her. He had seen firsthand the devastation that Peter's death had wrought on Leah's spirit, the way it had shaken her faith in everything she had believed in. But Marcus knew that she was stronger than she gave herself credit for. She had been the one to lead the resistance, to fight for the people of Rome, even when the odds were stacked against her. And now, even in her grief, Marcus believed that she could find a way to move forward. You don't have to do this alone, Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with conviction. We can rebuild. Together. Leah's gaze flickered to his, uncertainty flashing in her eyes. And what about you? What happens now? Marcus felt a lump form in his throat as he met her gaze. The question she was asking wasn't just about the city or the future, it was about them. About whether he could be the man she needed him to be. He took a deep breath, his voice steady as he spoke. I've made mistakes, Leah. I've done things I'm not proud of. But I've changed. And I want to spend the rest of my life making things right. Leah's expression softened, but the doubt in her eyes remained. People don't just change, Marcus. Not like that. I'm not asking you to believe in me right now, Marcus said, his voice low but earnest. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that I've changed. A chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve. Leah stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. But there was none. Marcus had laid himself bare, vulnerable in a way that he had never been before. And in that moment, Leah saw something in him that she hadn't expected. Hope. She let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging as the weight of her grief and uncertainty settled over her. I don't know if I can believe in anything right now. Marcus nodded, his heart heavy but determined. That's okay. I'll believe for both of us. The wind whispered between them, carrying the sounds of the city below. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens echoed, a reminder that the world they had fought to save was still in chaos, still fragile. But in this moment, standing together on the precipice of an uncertain future, Marcus knew that they had a chance. A chance to rebuild. A chance to find a way forward. Leah turned back to the city, her voice quiet but steady. Where are you going, Marcus? The question hung in the air, a question that had haunted her for so long. It wasn't just about direction, it was about purpose, about meaning. It was a question that had no easy answer. Marcus's heart swelled as he looked at her, the woman who had changed him in ways he hadn't thought possible. She had shown him what it meant to fight for something bigger than himself, what it meant to love, to sacrifice. He reached for her hand, gently intertwining his fingers with hers. Wherever you are, Marcus replied softly, his voice filled with emotion. I'm going wherever you are. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Leah allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something more. The future was uncertain, the path ahead filled with obstacles, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. And as they stood together, hand in hand, gazing out at the city they had fought to save, Leah knew that whatever came next, they would face it tog. Chapter 13. Rome stood on the brink of rebirth, but the scars of Nero's reign still marred every corner. Rubble and ash lined the streets, reminders of the violent uprisings that had toppled the old regime. Buildings lay in ruins, their skeletal frames reaching toward the sky like twisted fingers, and the air still carried the acrid scent of smoke. In the weeks since Nero's fall, the city had become a battleground of a different kind, one where hope and uncertainty collided in equal measure. The people of Rome had been freed from Nero's oppressive grip, but with that freedom came a new struggle, the fight to rebuild, to reclaim their city from the remnants of destruction. Marcus Vitali stood in the city's heart, watching workers move through the ruins, clearing debris and salvaging what they could. His once pristine suit was now dusted with dirt, his sleeves rolled up as he helped where he could. This was a side of Marcus that few had ever seen. The man who had spent years pulling strings from behind the scenes was now in the thick of it, doing whatever was necessary to restore order. The media mogul turned revolutionary had become a symbol of hope for many, though not everyone was convinced. There were whispers in the streets, rumors that Marcus's change of heart was only temporary, that once the dust settled, he would return to his old ways, using his power to manipulate and control, as he did during his time as Nero's puppet. Marcus was resolute in his determination to make amends. He had spent too long playing the game of power and influence, but now, he was committed to restoring order. He had to. For Leah. For the city. For himself. As he moved through the crowd, offering encouragement to the workers, he couldn't help but think of Leah. She had also thrown herself into the rebuilding efforts, though Marcus had noticed the change in her since Peter's death. She was still a force to be reckoned with, but there was a distance in her eyes now, a sadness that Marcus couldn't reach. They hadn't spoken much since that day on the Overlook when Leah had asked him the question that had haunted her for so long. Where are you going, Marcus? What do you plan to do with the power you've gained? Marcus had given her his answer, but he wasn't sure if she believed him. He wasn't sure if she ever would. Marcus. The sound of his name jolted him from his thoughts, and he turned to see Peter's second-in-command, a wiry man named Nico, hurrying toward him. Nico had been with Peter since the early days of the resistance, and though he had always been a quiet presence, Marcus had come to rely on his steady hand in the chaos that had followed Nero's fall. What is it? Marcus asked, his brow furrowing as Nico approached. We've got a situation, Nico said, his voice low and tense. One of Nero's old loyalists, Tommaso, they've rallied a group of his men. They're trying to take control of the Western District.